On the line with us, our buddy David Pepper, the writer. His latest book, Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American. Political activist, former elected official, adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, served as chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party from 2015 to 2021, and writes a great newsletter over on Substack that I strongly recommend you subscribe to. It's absolutely free, as most are. davidpepper.substack.com will get you there. It's called Pepperspectives. And David, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Great to be back with you.
It's great to have you. I noticed in one of your notes that Kamala Harris had given you a call after, am I remembering that right, after one of your books?
Yeah, it was, as I described it in my newsletter today, it wasn't just that she called me, but it was what it was about. You know that you and I talk about this a lot, that the front line of the attack on democracy are the states and state houses. A lot of federal officials, I worry, don't see that. So we too often don't look at these state houses as the front lines that they are. And the reason Vice President Harris called me, and it was about a year ago, was because she had seen me on Morning Joe saying that. And she called me up to say, David, I so agree with what you're talking about. We need to do better. We need to do more. And it's, you know, the reason I wrote about today is now that she's a candidate for president, I can't be more excited that someone who hopefully, if we do our job well, is in that job, understands this state-based view of the problem. It's not only about a few swing states, a few House or Senate seats. It's about state houses, uncontested races, running down democracy in states, which then runs down the national democracy. She called me because she sees it that clearly, which was great then and even better now.
Yeah, I agree. And she understands her politics. Speaking of state-based politics, it has seemed to me for some time. In fact, I wrote a book called The Hidden History of the War on Voting back about 4 years ago. And I kind of came up with this notion at that time that once Republicans get a hold of a state, and in my opinion, the main way they do that is with right-wing talk radio, you know, in a state where there's no progressive stations. But I could be wrong. I mean, you know, but in any case, once Republicans get a hold of a state, they start messing with the election laws and they start purging voters in ways so that they never lose control of that state. And that certainly seems like what's going on in Ohio. You want to tell, first of all, I'd love to get your thoughts on that concept and how universal it may be. And then secondly, what specifically is your Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, up to?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. You know, the gerrymandering is part of it, but the purging of the majority that they are afraid of is a big part of it. And in a closer state, in Ohio, we all know Obama won by a few points in 8 and then 12. Purging of a certain set of voters in certain places can take a state that's winnable and make it hard to win. It can change the mathematics of winning. And when you look closely, and I write about this in both my books, when you look closely at the purging in Ohio, that's what's happened. I mean, the voting population of Cuyahoga County, Cleveland, that's the county that delivered the presidency to Barack Obama both times. Obama lost 87 out of 88 counties to Romney when you added up all 87, but the margin of victory in Cuyahoga County was enough to overcome all that, and he won. That's why Karl Rove was so upset in 2012. He knew it was over. Well, if you shave away enough of the votes that make up that majority you don't like, it can make a difference. And purging has done that in dramatic ways. I mean, I can show you numbers where even though populations in some cities have fallen, but not nearly as fast as the voting rolls have fallen thanks to purging. They've made mistakes. They have a big error rate. It punishes voters of color and poorer voters, the very coalition they're afraid of. And the thing this week, we had another round of purging on Monday. I'm not in Ohio right now, so I don't have the latest on what happened, but what I was pointing out over the weekend was there looks to be, now we'll see what the actual answers are, but yet again, it looked like in the purging process, there are at least very serious questions about who was on that list and why. Were they following federal law when it came to sort of the requirements that if someone updates their address for driver's licenses, it's supposed to be updated automatically as their address for voting. Some of the language they were using suggested they weren't doing that, so the Brennan Center asked them about that. We'll see, but this is a long history of using an antiquated voting purging process that has dramatically reduced one side of the two sides of Ohio politics. And I don't think it makes Ohio impossible to win, but the path to victory in Ohio now is far more difficult than it was for a Democrat than, let's say, 14 years ago or 12 years ago, because the side that votes for Democrats has been, minimized through all this horrific purging. And they just keep doing it again and again and again.
And we've seen this in state after state. I mean, Brian Kemp, when he was Secretary of State in Georgia and was running for governor against Stacey Abrams, purged 100,000 voters off the voting rolls just before the election, and then won by 50,000 votes. Surprise, surprise! Yeah. I mean, they have, they did this in Arizona. They did it in Florida, Texas, Kentucky. I mean, or Tennessee. Excuse me. There's a bunch of states where purging is like, regular purging of the voting rolls, particularly in black areas. And now that the Supreme Court, in what was it, 2016, 2018. Legalized caging, sending out postcards and bouncing people when they don't send them back.
That was an Ohio case, and that 5-4 decision allowed it to go to other states. So let's be clear. There are lists that are generated when people move out of a state. It's called the National Change of Address List. So that's a very easy way to track how to keep your rolls clean. Someone moved from Ohio to Florida. Someone moved from, Cleveland to Cincinnati. They need to re-register, etc. There's also lists generated when people pass away. So there are ways to update your rolls on legitimate lists. What happened in that case, and is happening in some states, not all yet, hopefully it stops, but I'm afraid it can grow, they use infrequent voting as their trigger. And then they send a postcard. If someone doesn't respond to a postcard from someone they never heard of or someone they think is a Republican, then after a couple of years, they're off the rolls. It's when you introduce infrequency of voting as the trigger versus someone passed away and is on that list or someone moved is on that list. The infrequency of voting is the problem because a lot of people don't vote. A lot of people may forget to vote, choose not, whatever the reason. They have a right.
Or they just vote in presidential elections. I mean, that's very common.
Right. But the government is saying in Ohio, oh, you didn't vote a couple times in a row. That means in a few years you may lose the registration entirely, which is a matter of government. Honestly, the government should be doing that.
Right.
Use the list of people that moved, fine. Update the rules accordingly. Find the list of people passed away, go for it. But the infrequent moving is what captures so many more people unnecessarily, leads to all the mistakes, and it ends up meaning that poor people, people who move a lot, African Americans, as you said, they get caught up disproportionately in that part of the purging process.
Right.
That's the problem.
And 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court legalized this after, and with the postcards. I mean, this was called caging back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and for 30 some odd years, as if my recollection is correct, the Republican Party operated under a court order, a restraining order, preventing them from doing caging. And then the Supreme Court came along and said, oh, no, it's perfectly legal. You can do that. I keep pointing out, and I wish the Democratic Party would turn this into a meme. I don't know. Maybe I'm just more fond of it than I should be. But if a state wants to take away your gun, they have to go to court. They have to prove, they have to prove that there's a reason, a legal, justified reason. If they want to take away your vote, they don't even have to tell you. Isn't that backwards from how it should be?
Yeah, I mean, and we're talking here, again, the process itself is flawed. But in 2018, when they released in advance a list that allowed us to look at it, people were on the list 20% of the time in complete error, meaning they had participated, but somehow they got put on a list as if they hadn't. So imagine if you're being deprived of any other right by pure government error. You show up to vote, you had been voting all along, and you're told, sorry, you were on that list, and you have no way to take it back at that point. Right. So we're talking about a really blunt force instrument, depriving right to vote, which is absolutely full of ridiculous errors and also has a disproportionate impact. And they don't change it because I think it's pretty clear they don't mind the results that it's leading to.
David, you're an attorney. I'm not, and in fact, you're a professor in law school. I would love to get your thoughts on this, and I know we've discussed it or kind of danced around it in the past, but the National Voter Registration Act, NRVA, also known as the Motor Voter Act, 1994. In the header of the law and in the black letter body of the law, in both places, it explicitly says voting in the United States is a right. Congress passed that. It was signed into law by President Clinton. Voting is a right. Why is it that a state can take away your vote without going to court? I don't get it.
No, I think it's a fair question. I think if we had different courts and different majority, we'd have voting much more secured as a right. Again, there are a lot of decisions that were changed in the 2016 election outcome. Citizens United would have been changed. The end of gerrymandering would have happened, and this is another 5-4 case that with a different result, without the Merrick Garland situation being held up.
Right.
I think issues like this. Now, again, good thing, and we got to get there. The next round of voting rights legislation that's sitting there to be passed, if we have majorities, will clarify this problem as well, and
right.
It will say, like I said, there are all sorts of lists you can use to update your voter rolls. People aren't against updating voter rolls, but to use infrequency of voting in the caging process you described under proposed legislation after that Supreme Court case would no longer be allowed.
Yeah,
and that would be a huge difference. And one other thing, by the way, I'm a big believer that yes, we're talking about this as lawyers, but there is something everyone can do about this right now, and I wish more did it. Some do. There is every single mayor, every single county commissioner who happens to be a Democrat could use the full power of their offices and their city halls to register voters that go into every rec center, homeless shelter, public housing unit. And I worry that as one side is attacking our voters relentlessly like Frank LaRose is, our public officials aren't as on it to say, hey, if you're in the city of Cincinnati or the city of Dayton and you are being purged by the state, I'm livid about it, I represent you, and I'm going to use the resources of my government wherever you interact, the health clinics of Cincinnati, for example, wherever you interact in my community, you will be asked for the opportunity to re-register. And if you did it the right way, those are the very places that people most likely to be purged will be going,
That's
seeking
brilliant.
out job and family services. So I talk about this all the time in my Saving Democracy book.
Yeah.
We want to sue and win,
yeah.
But we need to be as dedicated to lifting voters back onto the rolls as they are removing the rolls. And I worry sometimes we're not keeping up with them when we have all the ability to do so.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
Yeah, the great David Pepper. Get over to Substack, davidpepper.substack.com, and sign up for Pepperspectives. David, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.